utakata internet.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello from wherever you are watching us here at The Big Picture. This is The Big Picture. Big topics, great guests, interview, and interesting perspectives. Today, again, for the second week in a row, this must be a record. We have the entire gang here. Justine, please, can you say hello to the people?
Hi, everyone. I'd missed you guys. And I'd missed the gang, too. I get to see them only on Monday, so this is really cool.
Yes. In terms of missing, bado tuna struggle kidogo, but
wow.
yes.
Check it 2 points. Immediate no.
Tom,
Yeah.
That's for next week, by
It's
the way.
okay.
The comeback is wrong.
Next week, I have done
You're boycotting.
Yeah, boycott the big picture.
Yeah.
Hashtag boycott the big picture.
Wewe. Hey,
You know
sema
how
hivyo watu
hashtag
wanaweza chukua
dangerous
serious.
is. Yeah, man.
Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom Juana. Excited to be back. Just another discussion. We only meet once a week. So the discussions that happen before we go live are usually epic. That's why we had to explain why Justine and I were on and on about something. But
Yes.
Yeah, excited to be back, man.
We shall get into that deep, and I'm sure for anybody who watches The Big Picture, one might suspect what it is that the two of them were talking about. His name starts with a K, and the last name is an L, and we shall not get into it this week. Please, spare us, Justine. Please.
Respectfully.
Shikilia tu ulimi.
Respectfully, we are not the ones who brought it up.
No, aya.
Right?
Don't unasema ni mimi.
Yes.
We just found ourselves.
Yes.
discussing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, aya. But the lady of the hour is with us today, Mercy Mutemi, tech lawyer, and a great person all round. Thank you very much for joining us on The Big Picture this week. First time here. I'm
Yes.
hoping the first of many, many occasions. Salimia watu. There are many people across the interwebs that are looking to say hello to you.
First of all, thanks so much for having me. I hear there's a gang, and I'm feeling a lot of FOMO, you know.
Don't worry. It's gang in name, but truthfully, the only person here who's really like a good person is me. Huyu just anatukejeli, and then huyu, man, if he's not...
It depends.
If he's not here, ako ndege, nini,
No.
passports, he's
We're just
so,
nice people.
Wow.
A gang
Okay.
is just a word we throw around.
Yes,
Justine
yes.
actually throws around,
Ah.
but we are generally just well rounded.
But
I'm
for
very
this hour,
excited.
yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to the gang.
Oh, thank you. I was
Yes.
waiting for that. Thank
Karibu.
you so much, and hello to everyone who's tuned in as well.
Atunanga hizo my initiations za mungiki. There's no blood, there's no goat. There are leaves, kuna matawi too. We can do a makeshift thing. Anyway, Mercy, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, the timing of this episode could not be better because we've got quite a bit that's been happening, not just locally, but globally in terms of freedom of expression.
Yes.
And the landscape is literally changing as we observe and as we watch. And who was it that said, may you live in interesting times? Was it Confucius? Who was it?
I wouldn't know.
Tom.
But these are them.
These are them.
This is like every single week. We're just gonna let you know. He comes here with like really big words.
He's like read along.
Yeah, and like a saying you've never heard. And then he's
not really asking.
No, guys,
Yeah.
Who said this?
Where you live in
He
interesting
knows.
times
Yeah.
is literally like the basics. Yani
No,
ukiingia
no.
standard 1, hiyo lazima ujue.
Confucius standard one.
Tulianda tu. Why are we splitting hairs?
Your
Yeah.
group of schools is showing.
Hapana. Na wewe ni wakili shule. Anasema group of schools hapa. Anyway, yes, the times are interesting.
Yes.
We all agree on this. And freedom of expression now more than at any time in our country, on our continent, and around the world is worth really discussing, right? Because the threats are many. What did they used to say in Game of Thrones? The night is dark and full of terrors. Yes. So this is
Hiyo
kind of...
tunajua.
Hiyo unajua.
We're up the times.
So I've brought it now from 5,000 years ago.
Bas.
Okay, so I'll only use TV references
But
from now
now
on.
you get
Thank
it.
you.
Modern arts.
Yes, modern
All
art.
is modern arts, not TV.
Yeah, okay, modern art. Sawa,
Yes.
sawa. But before we get into it, African Censor has been working really, really hard. The team's been working really hard on bringing you a second edition or a second season of that series that really rocked our worlds in the end of 2023, early 2024. produced by Joy Kiregia and Sam Munia, titled Deals, which looked into land corruption across the country. 60 to 70% of all of the cases in court are land-based.
Yeah.
The amount of heartbreak across the country with regard to, ownership and validity and provenance of titles in this country is something to behold. And we've been spending quite a bit of time. Joy spent almost a year working on this series, this new series, and it comes to you beginning this weekend. There are already some episodes that we've re-upped, and here, for the first time, is a trailer of Title Deal Season 2.
If you put a thief in charge of a country, thievery becomes everybody's favorite pastime.
It is like a movie. I'm talking about very senior security officers, but they are the perpetrators.
The cartels are more powerful than the justice system.
Title Deals is back, and the deals just got darker.
If you put a thief in charge of a country, thievery becomes everybody's favorite pastime.
It is like a movie. I'm talking about very senior security officers, but they are the perpetrators.
The cartels are more powerful than the justice system.
Title Deals is back, and the deals just got darker.
If you haven't already, click on the subscription button at YouTube and look out for that series, Title Deal Season 2, coming to you from the 20th of April. And I can tell you, we've previewed some of these episodes, and it's just, it beggars belief the kind of things that are happening in this country. But nonetheless, this is our commitment as Africa Uncensored to public interest investigative journalism that really matters to you. If you haven't watched the season, if you haven't watched the series, you can go to YouTube and just look through our playlist. It's right there. 5 fantastic episodes that really let you know what exactly is going down. Now, freedom of expression, right? So if we were to go through the number of things that have happened over the past couple of weeks, right? From the statements, and we were talking about this last week, from the statements of the CDF, General Kahariri, to the statements of the NIS chief, Nurdin Haji, what have you. There's that. Then, obviously, from all of last week going into the weekend is the echoes of war debacle. Then, even if you were to look at some of the political statements that happened over the weekend, this Ruto versus Sifuna thing, all have sort of like, threads that we can pull. And if we pull hard enough, it goes back to freedom of expression. So before I let you weigh in, Mercy, there's like a brief rubric that we're going to use to tell us where we are in terms of stages, because I'm sure there's people at home who are wondering now, where's the line and where are we exactly? Yeah. So stage 1 is initial restrictions and subtle control. So that's self-censorship, and censorship and state censorship. So you typically see this from parastatals that have some sort of power to manage and mediate within the media. The second, and there's also targeted repression. So under stage 1, there'd be now specific, like Tom ama Justin, kwanza wewe, vile unapenda kuongea, targeted repression ingeanza hapa.
Free all yappers. Yes. Honestly, free the yappers. We have things to say.
Yeah. So then there's stage 2, which is overt suppression and escalation. So there you'd see restrictions on assembly and demonstration. Sound familiar? Yeah. Control of media and information, right? And then jailing of critics, all right? So these things, weirdly, strangely, and oddly familiar. And the third would now be, I guess when this has metastasized, widespread human rights abuses, total suppression. That in there you'd see human rights abuses, mass arrests, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, complete and total suppression of the opposition, right? Or perhaps even co-option, because this thing takes many faces, and normalization of repression, right? So. Yeah. So if those were the stages, broadly speaking, Mercy, where are we in your view?
I would say all of the above.
All. Okay.
I don't see them as progressive stages. When I zoom out and look at the aspirations of Article 33, the freedom of expression article, and I think about also the African Union having an Article 33, an Article 19 for them, and then also the Universal Declaration. These were the things that were targeted to be addressed by the legal regimes because they were happening simultaneously. It's the thing about nothing is new. All this has been there, which is why we have constitutions in place that prioritize human rights. So when I listen to what you're saying, it seems that it's speaking to different rights. Of course, right to freedom of expression being the anchor, because it's what gives you your right, for example, to participate in democratic process, to associate. Then there wouldn't be any reason to associate if you couldn't speak up your mind. Your right, even for the media, like that's where it's anchored, it's the right to freedom of expression. So you see in a lot of the way you're saying internationally, there is a targeted attack against all these moving pieces, and there's no way that one is successful without the other. That's why, for me, all these things always happen at the same time. And when you do like a human rights audit, the best thing to do is to always see the multiple ways in which all the various rights are being violated and how they speak a certain narrative, rather than is this the number of human rights, freedom of expression cases, the number of privacy cases. All of these things speak to a bigger picture when it comes to like the state of human rights. So yeah, all of them, and not just here. Everywhere
in the world. And
yes.
If you were to do those, like I was today years old when I learned that my rights were taken away from me in this way, and just looking through that same template of observing the progressions and that interconnection. You personally, Mercy. You, Mercy as Mercy, as we like to say.
Yes.
Right? When did you feel like my rights, me as Mercy Mutemi, my rights seem to be, someone's interfering with them? When was that? When did that alarm bell go off?
Do you mean like the cognizance that this is what is actually happening to us?
Because we can talk about it from the point of view of observing other people.
Exactly.
But it really becomes real when it's your life that's affected.
100%.
Yeah. So when did it become real for you?
I think it's different for Mercy the Mercy and Mercy the professional, and the Mercy for me that is a digital rights activist. Those are very different phases, and I think the recognition came in different phases. Like the individual that is me is understanding these concepts like from a school perspective, and being a student of what protections do we have, because we shout about freedom of expression all day long, and when you really examine it, very rarely do people interact with what actually is the right to freedom of expression and what is guaranteed, what is not guaranteed, as it's one of the famous things people like to say. It's not absolute, but I would say as a Kenyan, as a professional, it would be these times that we live in, and it's by observing all the layered pieces of the right to freedom of expression. I mean, there's the bit that is just, this is the legal protection of it, but then where do we exercise our freedom of expression nowadays? It's on digital platforms, which then makes you wonder how much of what I'm saying, consuming, is mine and is actually being targeted at people I'm talking to, because that's really part of freedom of expression, right? It's the first time we are seeing freedom of expression, for example, being used by a platform like Meta to validate harm. Or we are not going to clean up our platforms because of the right to freedom of expression. But if you really think about it, if I can't be on a platform, if I'm exercising self-censorship, if I'm saying this platform is too toxic or too harmful, for example, for people who've gone through gender-based violence, this is too toxic for me to participate in.
Yeah.
You've really affected my right to freedom of expression, right? It comes in so many different ways.
Yeah.
I think people wait for, oh, you've been arrested for fake news. And you're
And
a
that's when
lawyer.
we complain.
You're a lawyer who's being told to withdraw the case, you know, in court, and you know your freedom of expression is being. It's very rarely those overt ways, unless you are in the front lines. You're a media personality, because those are offenses that are targeted at media personalities.
Yeah.
Very often, it's what we should be paying attention to is this very quiet ways in which that freedom has not only been made impure for us, but it's also been taken away from us.
I love that you've used the word impurity.
Yes.
Because to me that's where the
Yes.
that's where the lack of freedom of expression sausages begins to be
Exactly.
made. But like making things impure. Mercy, I want to come back to you because
Yes.
there's a lot.
Yes.
Tom, I'll ask you the same question, right? So, you know, you and I talk about work and all of that, and I remember our first meeting with Tom was somewhere in Mombasa where he was interviewing me for a
YouTube.
for a YouTube video.
Back then.
Yes, way back. He was much
not
thinner.
way back.
The
It's not
cheeks
way
that
It was before everything. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And to me, I thought that was such an interesting way of a young journalist beginning to build his own platform using these rights that we're talking about. But today, you look to some of these platforms and you look to them, I guess, a media ecosystem and an information ecosystem, and there's an impurity to it that now allows for, you know, for these kinds of offenses, these subtle sort of like, you know, death by 1,000 cuts to start happening. So when for you did you like feel that prick, you know, that maybe my own rights, my own freedoms are no longer what I thought them to be?
See, when you hear freedom of expression, as it is in the Constitution, you think you can say anything.
Yeah.
Right? You say anything. And by anything, I mean there are no boundaries to what you can say. If you believe it to be true, you say it.
Yeah.
But then increasingly, as a person who's in the media, I've become more aware of things that I can say, as much as they're so true. The word we like to use, Justine, allegedly. Allegedly, you understand? And for me, that was when it became, that's way after the arrest, the brief 1-minute arrest. Yeah, that was also a moment, but then I expected it because, and it's a problem that I expected it. Because I expected to be arrested during this time.
So for context, Tom was arrested during, that
was 18th of June, I think.
Oh, in the protest last year?
Yes, in the protest last year. That's the
Oh
first
no, it was
day.
Calvin who was arrested in 2023.
Oh, Calvin was arrested in
okay,
Calvin was actually arrested twice in 2023.
I don't like how normalized this is. Like we're talking about
Yeah.
it so commonplace.
Yeah.
Yes.
Proceed.
No,
For
no,
doing nothing,
I like that you've identified just how we are. Ulishikwa lini? Oh, okay.
It's like a reminiscing.
I'm telling you.
It's like something you have to go through.
Ulipata hiyo getheri ya cell nini? Nani alikuwa anapiga? I know what you mean.
Umekuwa huko ndani pia.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But so it's a problem that I actually think of it as just a normal thing that could have happened. Well, I'm angry about it, but it's not the worst thing. The worst thing is that right now, I can't just say anything to begin with on this show. You understand?
Yes.
Because I might say something, and the next thing we know is we're having another situation like we had in when he got off a sunroof and said that Ford Foundation and all those, you know the things he said, right? Against a bunch of CSOs and media, including African Censored. And so for me, it's being wiser with what I say online. Not because what I'm saying is false, but because that could land me in jail for defamation or for libel, for something that is true.
You know, you're walking an interesting line where there's things that you want to say, there's things that you feel are important to say, but then there's also things that should you say them and how you phrase them, even the law as it is, forget about, you know, whether we are under threat, etc. There could be certain sanction that happens. And I guess that's the line, that's a thing that we all kind of have to wrestle with, right?
My theory is different first of all, being Kenyan, East African, also African, a lot of our laws, our defamation laws, allow for not criminal defamation, but defamation that can be abused to limit the rights, especially for the media. So, for example, we've had this conversation many times where slap suits are becoming very common. So what he's afraid of is not really a legitimate defamation suit, because this is something he's researched. He truly believes in it. It's just, he's making an assessment. Do I need to continue my work or do I want to fight?
Let me just put up my hand.
Could you kindly just define slap
Thank
suit?
you. I was going to do that.
Could I?
Yeah,
Yes.
Slap
define slap suit.
suits.
Yes.
Okay. So literally it's a slap. Think about someone slapping you. Like you say something and then you slap. But what it really is strategic lawsuits against public participation. So it's a lawsuit that's meant to stop the public from participating on a topic, but it's targeted towards journalists and media houses. And those have become really, really common. I just wanted to point out that I hope you realize that in his example, just that self-censorship, that is the goal. It's not, the arrest is not the goal. The getting people to see how powerful structures are, that's not the goal. The goal is for people to not say what they really mean. Like you will have research you've done, you will have things you really believe in, but the moment people start exercising excessive self-censorship before it happens, then the goal is complete. Like you have, I like the Kamba version of what impurity is. Like you have vuchad, you have chafuad, the right to freedom of expression.
Interesting. Justine, I want you to lean into your experience as a comedian. And we had this, so Tai Ngashira was seated where you were, where you're seated right now last week, and we were having the same discussion. And I think it's something that I didn't ask you, I really wanted to, because you kind of playing with this question of freedom of expression, both as a person who's on a platform like this, that where we discuss it maybe like through a more journalistic lens, but also as a comedian, right? So have you ever felt that pressure that Mercy is talking about, that things can go bad, even on a platform where satire, where comedy, where it's allowed?
Afraid? Nah, I'm not scared about anything. I'm just like, I try to be brave, because the things that I'm trying to say are not necessarily, like, I'm not targeting people. Like, my work is not about, you over there, you should stand there and feel shame, and like, okay, that's part of it. But like, it's very much part of it. It's very much part of it, because a lot of people's lives are in the domino of that, like someone with power. So for me, the thing that I try to do is like, the joke is just a tether to the point that I'm trying to make. And I try as much as possible that the core of my work is informative, it's factual, even if it's mostly jokey. Like, I am aware that, oh, if I say this, it's gonna sound a certain type of way. But also, I am very lucky that I am equipped with like the language of satire, which is layered. And I know there are some MPs who don't like to speak, admittedly do not read, and have said they've never claimed to have gone to school. So that's, you know, like sometimes it could be like a barrier of interaction in communication. So I think that could also help me sometimes. So it's about, the core of my work is to tether the information in as many jokes, as many light-hearted moments as possible. So it's less about the person and more about the information that I'm trying to pass. So being afraid for me is, I'm scared, but I'll do it anyway. Yes.
Okay. There were girls who were scared, but they did it anyway last week. Right? These girls, and I'd have to say that the entire drama festival's fraternity that stood behind these young ladies demonstrated something, you know, to your point about being scared but doing things anyway. But that ushered in like a really, for me, what it reminded me of was there was a similar, I think it was also drama festivals, where we were coming towards the end of the Kanu regime, and George Saitoti was a minister. I can't remember what ministry he held, but he was invited to be one of the guests of honor, and Eric Wainaina he of Kenya Daima, right, was asked to sing what was a very popular song even before, you know, Daima Kenya, Kenya Daima, Nchi ya Kitu Kidogo.
Yes.
You remember that?
Oh yeah, I'm old enough to remember that.
Are you old enough to remember that?
You don't know this?
I know the song. I know the song. I just wasn't there.
Okay, so
He just
sing the
doesn't know
first
the
stanza.
We could have revoked your Kenyan card.
Yes, yes.
Time.
Eh?
Time.
Please.
Gavana, please, tupatie time,
director
please.
is-
Just.
Okay, after
short
Kitu
on
Kidogo,
time.
the next line is.
Can we just proceed? Can we just proceed? Yes, Jan, you're making a point.
Yes,
so-
you are dope.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
I shall forgive you.
Yes.
So he gets on stage and he starts to sing Nchi ya Kitu Kidogo.
Yeah.
And he's stopped, right? And it becomes, am I misremembering it? I believe he was
No.
stopped, yeah?
Yeah.
And it becomes this huge debate about, you know, what the limits are, what the lines are. And we very nicely elucidated what perhaps one of the first things is fear, right? And making impure of this, you know, environment. But I want us to lay into that a little bit more, because we now see this as a global issue,
Exactly.
right? So, you know, Kellyanne Conway, who was a representative of the White House when Trump goes in 2016, when being asked about these allegations that now the spokesperson, I think it was Sean Spicer, had made about the size of the crowd at his inauguration, and they basically lied and said that, you know, that was the biggest crowd that they've ever seen. Then she's questioned about it, and they're like, yeah, but we have our alternative facts. Now that's ushered in an entire, you know, debate and subject. You know, like there's an entire subject on alternative facts. But the question that I want to ask is really about being where the line for freedom of expression is in a post-truth world, like where everybody has their facts and they feel entitled to them. And yes, the Constitution is there as a matter of fact, but let's look even at the events of the past week, even with Butere, etc.,
Yes.
etc. Who was paying attention to the facts, right? Everybody was entitled to their own opinions, etc. And okay, well, Justine was paying to. Well done. Thank you. Yes.
Like that.
Yes. but the question remains, right? So where's the line? Is it harder to see? Is it easier to see? How do you defend that line? How do you toe that line, especially digitally, when everybody is entitled to their own facts or feels entitled to them?
All right. I'll start this by asking the gang a
Yes.
question. Do you feel that you should have the right to tell lies?
No.
Of course not.
Interesting.
I will
No.
say,
No. Okay. Well, this. Okay. Wait. Okay. Wait.
can I just say?
Ngoja.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So.
Is it a yes or a no?
All
Or a
right.
maybe?
Mine is very complicated.
Okay.
Mine is like, Caesar exists and she lies constantly, and she's one of my favorite people in the world.
Yeah.
I love her very much.
Yes.
She lies, but it harms no one.
Yes.
So that's okay.
What's it called?
But-
A white lie?
Yeah, it's a white light. But now the problem is there's a lot of us have become so accepting of this.
Yes.
It's like we're breeding a culture where it's okay to lie if it's not harming anyone, but there's a part of our psyche that's kind of adapting into the
Yes.
acceptance of the lie as truth, and just existing in a world where those lies are acceptable, which kind of blurs the line of why we truth seek all the time anyway. Why do we want to know the truth then if you're just okay believing the lie anyway?
Anyway.
That's why I have a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Strong no.
Yeah, no, mine was a hard no.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because I'm looking at it more from the like what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Like we're on a platform, and there's an expectation that the things that come out of our mouths
Yes.
should be truthful.
Yes.
Should be factual. I should say not truthful, but factual.
Yes.
And if I'm allowed to lie, I guess where's the line, right?
Yeah.
But I can see where this argument might
Yeah.
go, because there's a context
Did you
in
see?
which, yes.
Did you see the slope? Did you start sliding down?
Yes.
There
yes,
you
yes.
go. And
All right.
and to just add,
Yeah.
so in your perfect world where there exist truth and lies, who is in the middle telling you what's true and what's false? Who is the arbiter of truth? So I say this to introduce, I mean, it's a very American concept, but
Yeah.
they seem to have already also abandoned it. But there was this idea of the marketplace
Yes.
of ideas.
Yes.
Like you throw in yours, I throw in mine, and this is how you give people their dignity, is that you trust that the audience are adults
Yes.
who are right thinking and who can make decisions for themselves and pick out from the marketplace of ideas. Like if it's about journalism, the idea is that you present your facts and I present my facts, and it doesn't matter if they're completely contradictory as long as I've quoted my sources and it's for the public to choose. That was the idea of the marketplace of ideas. So to answer your question from a very Kenyan context, come from that world to this world, that line doesn't move. It's stagnant, right? And it doesn't have that false duality, and I call it a false duality for a reason, of truth and lies. Because historically, it depends on who has the power. The person with the power tells you what the truth is, and the person without the power, no matter how well structured they are. And this was so dangerous when it came to people's experiences, where, I mean, go back to our 844 education system. Hopefully, I hope CBC produces different results, where the story we believed was is it the lion's story?
Yes.
Because we never got...
the story of the hunter.
Of the hunter, because we never got the other side of the story.
Yeah.
And that became the problem of a false duality of truth and lies. Instead, all human rights bodies, whether it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the African Charter on Human People's Rights, and the Constitution of Kenya, they structure the right to freedom of expression in a very different manner. It's speak. Across whatever medium, speak. Except for these very specific categories. And the categories are so limited. It's hate speech. Can we argue with that? Knowing what hate speech does to communities, can we really argue with that? And hate speech is not I hate you. Hate speech has a very specific meaning in law. It's because like of the ethnic relations we have as Africans, where now you have to regulate. I mean, think about Rwanda, think about also our post-election violence and the ethnic roots for that as well, right? It's incitement to violence. I mean, who can argue with that? It's there's incitement to violence generally, and then incitement to violence based on discriminatory grounds. You don't have to say, I will do this or do this to a certain community. It's just the way your communication constantly is framed.
Comes across.
You're inciting violence based on some discriminatory grounds, whether it's people's gender, whether it's people's where they come from, the ethnic origin, just something in that direction. It's propaganda for war. All right? I mean, these are very universally accepted principles. So that when it comes to art is not subjective or objective. Art is neutral. We don't get to sit down and start wondering about the effect of this art. Even from a protectionist perspective, as long as this art does not cross the line, is it inciting violence? Is it propaganda for war? Is it hate speech? If it doesn't cross those lines, then leave it alone. It's not for us to judge whether it's good or bad. What it's doing to the public is what its job is. Anger some, upset some, make others cry, excite some. That is art. Yes.
Interesting. I was going to ask, but I like that we've relied on those very static definitions of what the Mfalme has said. Thank you for explaining slap suits. Can one settle those out of court?
That is what a slap suit is intended to be, right? So I have I don't like to call it a privilege, or it's rather a privilege. Or what's the opposite of privilege? That one.
Why am I being looked at?
Group of schools. I went to Machiavelli Primary School, so I don't know.
Well, let's just put it this way, denial of privilege.
Yeah,
carry on.
I have the lack of privilege or the disadvantage of representing a couple of journalists and organizations in slap suits. And when you read them, they go for the jugular. Like they really want to silence the media house to where, okay, defending this suit versus just settling this suit, what's easier? And the first thing they'll ask you for is, pull it down.
I mean, that's happened to us.
Exactly. It's pull it down, and the second thing is, don't ever talk about us again. Not even this, us in general again. And that's the cost of, what a slap suit is. So unless you're a journalist who is supported by a very able media organization, you're going to settle. You're going to take this content down, and you're going to just well, self-censorship, but then also
Yeah.
there's a court order that tells you cannot share this. And I'm very, one of my biggest frustrations is that our courts have not caught on to the abuse because
Yeah.
the law doesn't really recognize that there's an abuse. In other places, there's a clause in your defamation laws that says if you abuse
Yeah.
the defamation law, then you pay double the damages. And that is sort of like the direction we should be looking at.
I want to ask you
Yes.
this. I know that it's not only for journalists, right?
Yeah.
Activists
Yes.
also get targeted
Oh, 100%.
a lot by slap suits.
Yes.
Wait, just before.
Yeah.
Do comedians get targeted with
100%.
slaps?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
They
Also
do.
That's lazy.
It's very lazy.
Yeah.
And you know, I like how you, in your mind, you don't do a lot of jumping around to protect yourself because you're thinking you're in satire. But the fact that in your mind you have to stick to those strict lines of comedy is self-censorship as well.
Yeah.
Because you know what's happening cognizantly. Yes,
Yeah, my
please
question
proceed.
was, you know the success rates of these suits against journalists and activists. What's it like in Kenyan courts? Because I know of a few that happened in the early 2000s.
Yes.
But what about now?
So this is the conversations we've had with a couple of media houses. This is crippling us. Like this, the awards, especially from out of town courts, are really punitive and they're not reasonable because the people who are filing for defamation lawsuits are public officers. And somehow, in our legal regime, we've given it that if you're a public officer, then your reputation must be so high that if then there's a defamation suit somewhere, then the remedies should be really, really high. But you can imagine, first of all, do we have access to proper representation for journalists? Because I've seen so many of those cases where journalists just didn't show up for court or didn't have any representation. So it's literally a landslide for the politician or for the public figure, right? So where there's a well-coordinated response, and what I mean by well-coordinated response is that no journalist wakes up and says, I'm going to publish on this. Let me correct that. No journalist worth their salt is just going to wake up and say, I'm going to, destroy somebody's name. I mean, there are people who make that a model, debatable.
Those aren't journalists.
Exactly, and those are not the people who are being targeted, surprisingly. Those are people who are being targeted with other things, right? But the journalists I've spoken to, they have the evidence. Like, you know where you got this information from. And really what the court is asking you to do is just show me. Show me the path to what made you make this comment. And perhaps it was also a call to, the media fraternity to start, not to self-censor, because I do hate that that is what ended up being, but to create structures and systems so that if a lawsuit came today, you would be able to dispute it in like hours, right? Without having to think, oh, nilipata information wapi, right? It was a call to that kind of responsibility. But the success rates so far have not been good where journalists are being targeted as individuals and where they're not represented. There have been so many cases, you won't know about them because then they're dismissed, so they don't make it into like the public discussion. There's so many cases where the judges have also stood by and said, actually, this is nonsense, and you should pay this person for bringing them to court. But what is also needed, if you zoom out, is a policy change, because our defamation laws are being used to are being abused really by public officials.
Let me share a story about that as we move on. So last year we published the story on the fertile deception. And one of the strategies that the people who didn't want that story to go out was a slap suit strategy. And not only did they use that as a strategy, even the way they served us. They served us on Saturday morning at 3 a.m. Don't ask me what I was doing up at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning when I get a message with essentially that court order, right? They served us ex parte. They forum shopped for a court that would hear, what was that would hear their side of the story, and they expected that because they thought, that we didn't have our evidence, that would be enough. But the legal advice that we got was proceed. And we did. Eventually what happened was that we won. There was an award, but tumepata hiyo pesa.
Why not though?
That's the other thing. Now, like enforcement of those kinds of orders, when the person who wasn't supposed to win wins out, that's also been,
And you've not auctioned him?
When it comes to
not yet.
Are you not broke?
When it comes to collecting do you need a bounty hunt?
Hey.
I'm free. Yes. I'm free on Saturday at 3 a.m.
By the way, can I also just correct something for the
Yeah.
record? Not correct really, but
Yeah.
to clarify. When I asked the question about like should there be a right to tell lies,
Yeah.
it didn't. I'm being very cognizant of the environment that we live in.
Yeah.
For example, propaganda is not a new thing. It just rebranded.
Yes.
And congratulations to the rebrand because now it's fake news and
Yeah.
alternative facts.
Yes.
But propaganda was always there.
It's always been there.
I don't think that's what we are reacting to as a community. I don't think that is what we're struggling with.
Yeah.
What is new is the scale.
Yes.
The way it could be weaponized, the way it could really change people's minds, how powerful it could be,
Yeah.
to where now we are starting to see a line that starts at, an alternative fact or fake news and goes into all these other things. So again, the reason why you should just stick to that, that line that does not move is that it helps you distinguish from the white lies.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's fake news that is about a celebrity, I mean, go to court, we don't care. Don't arrest the journalist. Like,
Yes.
don't shut down media houses because someone said you had an affair, right? But if it's fake news that also has this trigger down effect where people are losing their lives because of
Yeah.
the fake news, for sure, that's something that the law does not permit.
Yeah.
So it really helps to ground you, so where you're not wasting your time with, is it okay that people lie? Because politicians lie all the time. Like, who's doing that?
Speaking of
Yeah.
which, that's a perfect segue for us to go into the next topic that we wanted to discuss. Over the weekend, there was a burial of Raila Odinga's bodyguard, and we try not to discuss the politics of the day as the politics of the day, but draw back and look at the big picture. But in there was an exchange between ODM Secretary General Edwin Sifuna and later the president who took the podium. Sifuna essentially of the Butere Girls issue said that hiyo ni mwiba wa kujidunga. Like essentially that was an own goal. There was no need for the government to have come down as heavily as they did on the girls, and the president needs to read the riot act to his people for essentially just completely, I don't use a word that was in my mind, but messing up and what would have otherwise have been an opportunity for that kind of robust discussion that we've just described. The president shoots back and says, Sifuna, I am a founding member of ODM, and should I choose to call a meeting, or I will call a meeting, and we can fire you, so come slowly, right? Now, within the broad definitions of freedom of expression, was Edwin Sifuna's rights to freedom of expression being threatened by the president? Because, you introduced that question of power. But within that marketplace of ideas and that kind of political debate, does that sound like something that tends towards repression? Does it, or is it squarely within that marketplace of ideas that we're discussing, Mercy?
I feel like now it's time for my students to jump in.
Go first.
Yeah.
Look, Stella Nyanzi, that is my favorite teacher. A person should be able to say what? I was not given any, cannot say these words in this show.
Yes.
A person should be able to call the president this and go home and have a good night sleep. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah.
It's the thing with this is that it will have to depend on the person of the speaker. Did he feel that after that he could continue speaking or could not continue speaking? Freedom of expression is exercised by me, the person who is speaking. So for us to say that his right was being curtailed, it would have to be from his perspective.
Or perhaps it wasn't his rights, but the rights of any other political oncomers who might have
That
thought
part.
to challenge the president.
That part, for sure. That when you start to see, I can't really say this, like that exercise that you have to do before you speak.
Yeah.
If you have to do that exercise, of course, then we can't say that landscape is a landscape that encourages a right to freedom of expression, for sure. Or even worse, if there are consequences, this thing that people like to joke about, that you're guaranteed the freedom of expression, but then you're not guaranteed freedom after the expression. I'm like, what nonsense. I am guaranteed freedom after the expression. That is the whole idea of the right to freedom of expression. So when people start to fear, or when people actually face consequences of things that they say, then you start to see. Perfect example actually would be the withdrawal of financial support from a lot of media houses
Yes.
in the US as a response to them not supporting a certain presidential candidate.
I mean, you could say the same of what happened here with the government
Of
advertising
course.
authority.
Of course,
Right? Yeah.
100%. It's denying, and I do hope people challenge these kinds of decisions. Actually, it's denying media houses revenue because they have been unfavorable, and then also it's just the broadness of it, unfavorable. Like that makes no sense. Like this is. Yeah, this is your job, is to report things as they are, and if a narrative is reflecting what is happening on the ground, then that is what it is doing. Go to court for defamation if you do not believe that these things are accurate, but otherwise leave people alone anyway. But that thing that happens to you after you speak, that is not going home and sleeping peacefully, that is a curtailing.
That's where we'd say that the rights are curtailed. One of the other ways in which the Ruto Sifuna thing over Butere Girls kind of played out was even before that showdown on the stage. I don't know if you guys saw Mwanaisha Chizuga, the deputy government spokesman's statement, essentially not defending but attacking Cleophas Malala for being in the girls' dormitory or in the girls' school after hours, etc. What I thought about that was this. There are those people who tend to logicize these kinds of abuses of people's rights.
Yeah.
And when you logicize something like that, when you try to make sense of it to be able to defend it, is that not, again, broadly speaking, not an attack on the freedom of expression of, say, the Butere Girls, but on the environment in which we can say these things? Because, again, to go back to this issue of power, right? Technically speaking, the deputy government spokesperson is a powerful person, that they would then lean into narratives that simply are not true and defend them, with their eyes wide open and looking like they're telling God's honest truth, right? Yeah. What does that tell you? Not just about the person, but I guess about the environment in which we are, that people like that. Because I've worked with Mwanaisha. Mwanaisha is a fairly intelligent person, would do things like that.
I think to your point, it's still, I think it's the whole power play thing again, because an extension of presidential authority kind of just trickles to the people that are around those power structures, right? Mwanaisha is in a very very visible position. Like what she says is considered news and important, and like what she said, what did she say? I'm trying to remember it. It was in Kiswahili. It was very articulate.
The presence of
yes.
online,
Yeah, she was like, what was Malala doing at a girls' dormitory in the middle of the night? I was a high school student once, and I performed in plays. I was always an extra. I did not have
exactly. I was like, where was this main character?
I did not have the skill
set
set at the time, but I really worked on it. When I left school, I was like, that's never going to happen to me again. I did it. Scripts. Yes, I am writing scripts.
You're the main character.
Shout out to me. So, like before, I think the thing that really stood out for me is that kind of phrasing, considering like a lot of, if you're doing anything artistic in a Kenyan high school versus prep time, you will do your preps and then you will go do the art thing because there's no extra day where the school is like, oh, 844 is so tough, we're going to give you a day. They don't care. They will give you a quiz right after like 4 hours of rehearsal. Like that's the kind of system that a lot of us went through. So Mwanaisha asking that particular question, it felt very malicious. It was very intentionally targeted. It's literally basically weaponizing a culture in which there have been people who have taken advantage of students and they almost never get justice. And in that particular situation, in the position that she's in, being so, what's the word? Like using her position to weaponize something that has harmed so many students to to essentially discolor the work that those students did, it's very heartbreaking. Like, because even the fight now is not just with Malala himself, it's now even with the school principal. Is she an irresponsible person? Like, do parents not care where the students are at? It's like so many people who are supposed to be guarding and protecting the students who have been, okay, we don't care who's here, like you can just walk in and do whatever. Like, that's not how any school works.
Hey, but and maybe Mercy and Tom, you can respond to this as well as you, Justin. But what if what Mwanaisha was doing is a survival tactic? Because we've seen people who've parroted propaganda do so, even believing their own lies. What if it's a survival tactic for the environment in which they are confronted with?
Bro, quit your job. You don't have to keep lying, considering the gravity of the situation. Like, those are kids. Those are kids. You're not just, you don't have beef with the place director now. It's now going to, like, kids have been tear gassed. Like, there's so many people in that domino who've been hurt. It's not about you anymore. So even if you're protecting yourself, what are you really protecting?
I think, Justine, we are overestimating the moral standing of a lot of these people who are in these positions. We are overestimating it, because anyone with a sane mind would know that tear gassing children is wrong. No one would try to justify it. But we've seen people in this same government defending the murder of people who were not even, you remember when the president said something, he's alive, right?
Yes.
You remember that? And everyone who's spoken about everything that happened last year, who is in government or wants to be in government in any way or is affiliated, has defended it.
But isn't that the point? The point is that you're in such an environment where it's no longer so much about your own personal morality. It is actually about surviving. And I was listening to a podcast before this about this question of freedom of expression. And there has been some data in some studies that have been conducted that display just how visceral people can become when defending their right to be part of a group, not even not even to defend the prurient interest. Just that fear of exclusion, and especially fear of exclusion where there's a consequence, like it's an unspoken consequence. Uliongea nini kuhusu serikali? Si serikali ilituma polisi huko. Why are you not defending that? We shall revisit, right? Like that, those kinds of unspecified sort of consequences, right?
Before I give it to Mercy, isn't this just like really lame peer pressure? Like, this is the lamest peer pressure I have ever seen, because you kind of have to, yes, you're surviving, but at what personal cost? At what future cost? Is any of the things defending worth defending even?
I mean, think about it like tribalism. Think about the kind of impacts that tribalism and ethnic violence have had on our society. When you think about what a person is defending, what idea a person is defending when they're saying, sisi watu wa Murema, ama sisi watu wa Lakeside, ama sisi watu wa nini, what real idea are they defending there that is so like, that is so important that they would go to war for it?
I think, but a lot of people kind of defend, what is it called? Like, people misconstrue like their cultural heritage with tribalism. It's I see it in my family all the time. I'm like, that's tribalism. And my brother's like, no, I'm like, no, that is tribalism. I'm saying my brother here because I love him. I love you, bro. But like sometimes when you're having a discussion, I kind of have to draw the line because I understand what he really wants is like for like your culture to feel protected and like the people who come from your area like celebrated, and that makes sense. But at the same time, they can also take advantage of that kind of protection, the kind of community. It's not completely detached from that. My thing is like the moment, even if you're my family, if you become a politician, you get elected into office, you're immediately my op. I don't know you. Because you can still
of this this discussion or this conversation or whatever.
Yeah.
And to really acknowledge their humanity, their bravery, their personhood. I was imagining myself as a high school student, and if I had gone through like half of what they went through, my God, like the things we went through in high school already traumatized us. You didn't need more. So I just really want to take a minute and make sure we really appreciate what they've been through and recognize that, yes, rights were really infringed upon and their dignity was really, really affected in this. And I have two reflections to make on the question you've asked. Supposing I removed the person of Mwanaisha from that position, let's talk about a career civil servant who has been in that position for 33 years. And I do hear your point in that sometimes the interest you're trying to protect is not the truthfulness of this statement. It's literally this.
Yeah, it's a political
Do I
interest,
say
it's a personal
this?
interest,
Do
yeah.
I say this, or do I go home and bid goodbye to my 33 years of career service? And I'm not an activist. Like I don't feel like going into and this has happened so many times, where you watch this even in the media or in Senate hearings, in National Assembly hearings, where career civil servants are being asked questions and they just lie.
They just lie.
Right? And at that point, you can see that the person is really torn. Not to justify, because I do believe what she's saying is 100% the position. Like, if you don't like what your job is making you do, then just step
leave.
down.
Yeah.
But that is from a very privileged and blessed perspective that I have other things to do when I step down. And that's why I'm saying let's forget that it's Mwanaisha for a second. I feel like there's a difficulty because we know who this person is and we've seen this person in a different context. I think that those situations that happen where people are defending something, a greater interest, and what I like to refer to that as is the weaponizing of real news or the weaponizing of truth or weaponizing of freedom of expression.
Yeah.
It's this idea that I will use my freedom of expression to fight your freedom of expression. Playing out in like in a courtroom, and if the battle was for freedom of expression, these other things wouldn't even matter, right? It would be, so then she said this, the judge is not looking at whether that is what violated the right to freedom of expression.
Yeah.
Because it is doing its job. Like this thing really provoked a lot of people to give a lot of perspectives, and one of the perspectives that was given was this different idea. What hurts us is the justice of it. What hurts us is what it takes away from the main topic, but that's what it's also supposed to do. Like, we're supposed to hate what the government is doing in response, because that is us exercising our freedom of expression. It would have been really bad if the government's position became what we just co-opted and we really, really believed in it. I like to see the ways in which the freedom of expression webs in and out of interest as we keep our mind on, you know, the eye on the prize. And that's what I was saying, like, can we bring back the Butere Girls into the scene? Like, what are you saying? Because he was there in the middle of the night, so then they don't deserve. It's the way we counteract these narratives that matters. If our only weapon is, oh, shut up, you're not doing this, then we are forgetting what's at the core. What's at the core is freedom of expression. Is if you have a problem with him, he's an individual, go after him. We do not care. Freedom of expression is with these girls. They had the right to freedom of expression. Did you protect it? Did you uphold it? And then that becomes like the focus of the conversation. It becomes the focus of the
conversation. And I guess us as mediators in some of these discussions also need to remember what the point is, right? And the point is that there is an issue here in terms of freedom of expression. And broadly speaking, not just within the context of Butere Girls, but within other social contexts, even political contexts, that there is a problem right now that we're facing where the freedom of expression is contested very heavily, especially, and I love that you brought this up earlier, when power becomes such an important tool and how power is being now manipulated to ensure that becomes, you know, something very, very, very difficult for us to do. I mean, look at our neighbors, right? And I hate to kind of like draw straws because we're kind of all in the same boat. It's us that us kind of, again, Titanic reference here, on the upper deck, but on a ship that continually seems to be, you know, going further and further adrift from what the principles are with regard to freedom of expression. Just two comments here that I want to make as as our guys in the gallery just bring them up. So Eric Mugendi says freedom of expression is an absolute regardless of what people say. That's why boundaries have been established to outline a clear and demonstrable harm. Beyond this, this makes me feel bad. I like that, Eric. Asante sana. There are some other comments, but I'll read them a little later. Let's move now to the final topic. Now, let's spark freedom of expression. Now it is freedom of trade that we are that we are discussing, right?
Or in other words, the current reality show.
Yes, man.
America.
And what
I love it.
I'm telling you, man, like Netflix, please, can you ama utupatia pesa, we produce it ourselves, right?
Write the script.
I swear. Justin, please.
Drive to Survive.
Your next special, surely. Ati Drive to Survive.
Yeah, it's Drive to Survive.
So obviously what we are talking about is this, continuing, I guess, snowballing into an all-out tariff war.
Yes.
The first salvo having been fired by Donald Trump, who comes out and, shows us all of these tariffs. And yeah. I'm not going to do the impression this week. I saw how you guys looked at me.
No.
Because you were Donald Trump.
It was really fun, wasn't it?
Do it again.
Really good.
It's
Yeah.
good. No, these guys do it again so that they can
Do
make fun of
it.
it. Just do it. I would
Tom,
do
we
it.
would never make
We would
fun.
never make fun
We
of
would never.
We
I
love
can
impressions.
see
Yeah.
the vision
Yeah.
though, like
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit of
But are you
orange
seeing how my
makeup.
freedom of expression is being
You're the one who's
affected here?
censoring.
I'm
Yes.
censoring myself
Yes.
because
now.
now I have censored myself on
Yes.
this thing. But look, in all seriousness, what this thing is doing is reshaping not just global trade but global relationships.
Yes.
And the thing that I've wondered about. Okay, so just to catch people up, if you haven't been caught up on what's happening. So Donald Trump, in an attempt to reshore manufacturing to America, in order to impact inflation of the dollar and to become more competitive as a trading partner to the world, has imposed tariffs across the board on countries from as far apart from their own policy as Namibia to people who are as central as China, right? So that's broadly speaking, where we are. And there's now this game of one China and the US, as other tariffs have been frozen for 90 days. What I've wondered about, is where Africa is in this conversation, where Kenya is in this conversation. I'll read some of the tariffs that have been imposed, right? Algeria, I think, is one of the highest, 30%.
Yeah.
Cameroon, 12%. Chad, 13%. DRC, 11%. The DRC.
Wait,
Yeah,
why are
the
they
DRC has-
tariffing the DRC?
So I think
It's the
as
conflict.
exactly, there's a conflict and there's the minerals. And remember, China doesn't just control. China isn't just a manufacturer. And controls that part of the value chain. They also control very important value chains that are now upstream. So, like for
Yes.
instance, 75% of all of the cobalt and coltan, that trade is dominated by China,
Yes.
even if it doesn't mine it, and that's how the DRC then now starts to
Yes.
get these kinds
Because
of
that's
things.
what it's about. It's
Exactly.
a digital war.
It is a digital
Yeah.
war, right? So there's Chad, there's Equatorial Guinea, 13%, Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, 21%, Libya, 31%, Malawi, 18%, Mozambique, 16%, Namibia, 21%, Kenya, I think we're somewhere around 10%, right?
Yes.
10, 11%. Now, initially, when I was looking at this question of tariffs, even before the launch of this trade war and this tariff war, we're looking at Trump as a sort of person who would pull something like this and be protectionist, but not to the extent that we've seen. And initially, my thoughts were, there will probably be some advantages that Africa can steal from this. But I wonder now, seeing what's happening, Mercy, is there anything to be gained from this war, in your view?
I want to laugh at the neighbors first before I come to my very dire situation.
Yes.
I have been on TikTok all day, just studying the China versus US thing, and two reflections to make. The freedom of expression bit.
Yeah.
You do realize China has its own version of TikTok. Like before this, you rarely saw any Chinese content creators who were not VPN'd and not saying anything controversial. And all of a sudden, it's the whole timeline is just Chinese content creators. And how it's sad that a government has that much control
Yeah.
that you loosen the restrictions to favor you, and then but also it's just something that's very interesting to observe. But then the other reflection from a legal perspective is how intellectual property has come into play, because the biggest what it seems like at the moment is that the people who are feeling the pinch, the biggest pinch, are luxury brands. And the reason they're feeling the pinch is because China, being part of an ecosystem, international ecosystem on trade, had agreed to comply with the rules on intellectual property. So we could manufacture in this factory. I will not dare to pronounce luxury brands because I am a Kamba, and the Kamba shows this luxury brand.
It is fine. We are Kenyans, and Kenya is our business.
This luxury brand that starts with G, right? But at the same time, produce.
I see it. I see it.
I'm not gonna do it.
Yes.
I love myself. Yeah.
Endelea.
This is self-care.
Yes.
You're
Self-censoring.
This is self-care.
Okay.
But I will make this bag.
Yeah.
In the same factory, I can make the exact same bag, but it will not be called this name, and I will sell it like in the local market.
Yes.
So, but you can take this thing that I sell to you for 10 yuan or whatever and sell it for $1,000 and I won't care. And what has happened is that China has now said, we don't really need to keep up with this high level of restrictions. We will tell you what everyone is doing, and that's the sort of the meltdown we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, this is very interesting. I just wanted to say that. But that's a neighbor's house and it's burning and haha, you know, very entertaining. Our house, though, has been sinking for a while because our countries have now found themselves right in the middle of a digital trade war. And when I say digital trade war, to be specific, I mean the tech war, right? Take you back to just before, the inauguration and Mark Zuckerberg changing tact and saying, please protect us. Please protect us. You would really have to understand who is the top 7, even in the capital markets, in the US capital markets. Those are tech companies, top, bottom. And the AU now and different African countries have come forward and said, this is what we want to be our digital. Equal partners with the US. It has become what's my least favorite word in the Kenyan vocabulary is the silicon savannah.
Yes.
Why?
I hate that word.
Explain.
One, our technology does not come from the same foundations as silicon. And I'll give you the example of M-Pesa. Why do we have M-Pesa? Like if you think about the
gaps in banking.
The idea of community, the idea of fixing problems, and you think about tech and, for example, the foundations of Facebook. Grading people and how hot they were. Those are very worlds apart. So what are you doing when your mission is to frame yourself? But then also there's the obvious reason where like the savannah is only what % of this country? Like why are we a savannah? Because savannah communicates a very specific messaging. So
it's narrative building as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right? But then also it's how all other African countries for different words and whatever are just trying to do that, right? But what is trickled down to is that we're doing the dirty work for tech companies. And I'll come to the issue of trade later on. So in a different height, I represent who are the underbelly carriers of tech companies. And these are the AI training workers.
The guys who are training algorithms.
Exactly.
The guys who are mediating against harm, etc.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this is who we are at this point in history, at this point in time. All of us here know a relative who is either in university or fresh out, who has asked for a computer or has asked for internet because they want to sign up for digital jobs. They're being pushed down our throats. We know what they are. No, we don't know what they are, but now we know what they are in that they are algorithm training work, they are content moderation work. But we are literally the foundation of these jobs. And they're outsourced jobs in the same language of manufacturing. So forget about the bags example, forget about we're manufacturing caps or this. What we're exporting is labor. We're exporting labor. We literally have a new category in our export processing zone where businesses can register for business process outsourcing. Where you say, excuse me, you are exporting labor. And that's what we're doing. So this is where now Africa comes in
Yeah.
contextually.
Yeah.
That we are also exporters. We also do trade with the US. Of course,
Yeah.
for the countries that mine cobalt, that's a very different context in that, again, they are the foundation of tech companies,
Yeah.
the phones, the Teslas, the everything. And right now, for tech companies to say you have to protect us from any government that comes up against us, thinking about the lawsuits in the African continent against the tech companies, that is
Yeah.
a very dangerous stance. It's almost as if where we are headed to is anything goes. For the benefit of the US,
Yeah,
anything goes. You will have zero protections. You will do whatever it is that we want, and then our governments have just fallen into that same trap because it has coincided with our key.
Do you know what this sounds like?
Yeah.
And I'm getting a knot in my stomach as you describe this. This sounds like the economic underpinnings of slavery.
Welcome to the point.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's what it
Welcome
is.
to the point.
Welcome to the point. Jan, meet the point. We are together. Yes.
So someone said this in a meeting I was in yesterday. It's not the new forms of slavery or the new forms of colonialism. It never stopped.
It never stopped.
It's the continuation. And I could go into detail. I mean, it's one thing to know about it and the harmful effects of these jobs,
Yeah.
but when you really study the model within this work, which this work is being done, favorite example to give is the remote task example.
Yes.
If you remember the announcement, when unabonyeza, unapata dola, you know, remember that? I don't know how many people
Taptengele.
zeroed in that
Yeah.
the very next day, remote task shut down all accounts for all Kenyans, and people had money in their wallets because you couldn't withdraw until a specific date. You could, like, there's so many rules, and that's just money that's gone.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's forced labor.
Yeah.
Or talking about Africans being brought in to do content moderation for TikTok and Facebook in Kenya, where they're not being told, actually, you're coming to work for TikTok, or you're coming to do content moderation. That's human trafficking. As in, there's so many layers to it. And what the US is telling us right now with these tariffs is play ball
Yeah.
to make sure that we keep our AI cheap. I mean, DeepSeek was a very bad accident, but they'll be damned if that happens again.
Yeah.
And who's training ChatGPT? Those are Kenyans.
It's Kenyans.
I'll
Go ahead,
just say,
Justine.
I
Yeah.
think for me, the not funniest, but like the worst part about this particular component is like people are trapped here with no wages, no upward mobility.
Yeah.
Like there's like Africa is now the slave ship. Like you are inside it. And every time you say something like this, people are like, but no, it's just like you have to do a little bit of this job until you get to the next level. I remember when I was watching, what's her name, Barbara Walters' interview for the people who I think
Yeah.
trained ChatGPT
Yes.
and like worked for remote tasks and all these different digital companies. One of them said, we don't have our colleague here because he literally is, like, he lost his mind.
Yeah.
Because most of the models he was trying to train are things he was not prepared for. There was no therapy. There was no help even after the fact that he went through a whole situation where he could not even like operate after. Like after your work, you actually have to go back to your house and you have kids, but who are these people now? Because now your head is like trapped in the AI model training thing.
Yeah.
So I will say, like, being trapped in the ship, the conversation that a lot of people keep forgetting, and like even especially the people who use ChatGPT for therapy and everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, you are doing free work, training a model again over the graves and over the unpaid labor of people who are already not paid. And then you're doing it also at the expense of like a lot of our resources.
Yeah.
Because right now, remember, the water privatization bill was signed. Which means the water in this country could be sold to anyone.
Yeah.
And if AI is the future, and as you said, these companies come and establish here and they want to connect Africa to the world, what you will be giving up is essentially the thing that happened with the carbon offset programs, and it's going to be that. And the next phase is going to be resource taking, like where your actual you're not just training the models, but you also have to live within the confines of what
the models.
AI allows you
It's
to.
almost like you're building the prison that you're going to live in.
Exactly.
Because then
that.
also the algorithm is not being trained using data sets that
That are reflective of
contextual
our
to
Yes.
you. So then the algorithm that's released back to you,
Yes.
Yeah.
trained by you, released back
Back
to
to
you,
you.
is harmful.
Yes, and it's not, it doesn't even recognize you. And
No.
there's like I think there's 3 black women, 3 or 4 black women who warned about what AI is going to
Yes.
look like in 2021.
Yes.
They were like right on the money. They said it's gonna start using faces of black people so that it feels diverse and
Yes.
connected, but it has absolutely no representation
context,
of like black people or like brown people, because
Yeah.
like they want to sell the lie of diversity.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it gets to a point where you can't actually use the models because it doesn't recognize you. And if you try to build anything that's outside of it, especially if you have to work within the digital context, they're going to hunt you down as a competitor.
It feels like we are doomed to be, as what the Bible says, drawers of water and hewers of wood forever, even within this model,
Yes.
right? And Mercy, you wrote something really astute for Al Jazeera. I'll just quote some of what you said, because it then leans into some of the stuff that we've been talking about with freedom of expression, but also this question of the dignity of work and labor and where our futures are, and possibly even the tariffs discussion, right? Pretty long quote, but I'll it's important, right? Meta and other major US companies maintain a convoluted corporate architecture to avoid exposure to taxes and regulation in the dozens of countries where they do business. They commonly claim not to operate in countries where they count millions of users and employ hundreds to refine their products. Until now, these claims have rarely been challenged in court. Thank you, Mercy, for being one of those people who challenge these things in court. These workers now know that Meta's apparent reversal on content moderation is anything but. As presented in the grievances to the court, the company has never taken the issue seriously, not seriously enough to stop the civil and ethnic conflicts, political violence, and mob attacks against marginalized communities that thrive on its platforms. The right to freedom of expression is an important human right, but we will continue to remind big tech that equally important are the rights to dignity and freedom going forward for Africa, right? We might be talking about, yes, my voice matters, but so does my body.
Yeah.
So does my right to be able to earn a living, especially in what is now being called horribly exploited. I was asking it, how do we free ourselves? How do we ensure that in 5-10 years,
We're not the same.
we're not the same? Yeah.
I personally, and this is after years of researching this field, I personally don't hold the idea that this is hopeless or that this is lost. I do have a lot of sinking ship. This is what is currently happening. We're negotiating, and this is as a country, we are negotiating for more digital jobs, for the business process outsourcing model to be like our route out of poverty. Like when we say 1 million jobs, we're imagining that they're coming through the BPO model. Okay, park that conversation for a second. Kenya just launched the AI policy framework. Just the other day, there was a big event around it. Okay. One of the things that Kenya is famous for saying, which is incorrect, is how we have very little AI capacity. So I want you to reconcile these two things. What is happening in these BPOs, in the business process outsourcing companies, which, by the way, very few are Kenyan. A lot of them are either American or European, right? What is happening in those, in the tens of thousands of people that they hire, is training of algorithms. So you want to tell me you have hundreds of thousands of workers training algorithms, but you have very little AI capacity. Does that make sense to you?
Doesn't.
And that's on purpose, right? And then we dip into the intellectual property conversation again. If I'm Meta or if I'm ChatGPT and DeepSeek is my competition, I want to keep a tight lead on how my data sets are being trained, on my language models. I want to keep a very tight lead on it. And we've examined what's happening in these BPOs and can tell you that the BPO is a facilitator in this conversation. The actual work happens between the tech company and the workers. You go into work and you're signing into a computer that is being tracked from Silicon Valley or whatever it is. You're being given instructions from Silicon Valley. You are being assessed from Silicon Valley because there are very huge intellectual property concerns. Because without the IP, then all of this means nothing. Like everybody is trying to be the first to launch a new product. So you really do need to protect the IP, right? So if you have that understanding, as a country or as a continent, because it's not also happening in Kenya alone, it's to realize that you are literally at the cusp of the greatest thing that is happening, which is AI. At Summersource, they were training Elon Musk's self-driving cars. That's where they were being trained. It's just pictures of San Francisco roads or whatever roads, and you're being told to mark them and to label what is on the road. It's not, it doesn't sound reasonable that you're not stepping up to the negotiation table as an equal partner.
And with this kind of wealth in terms of knowledge.
Exactly. But for the longest time, these centers were known as call centers. They were doing customer care work. And there seems to be, in Kenya and in Ghana, where now Meta has moved, an intentional misinformation campaign where, well, we have work, but we don't really tell you what the work is.
What the work is.
Right? And we use this broad terms, you know, be part of the digital future and be part of AI. But what exactly is it? We don't have a legal regime that demands that Parliament asks, who are your clients? What are they training? Like Walmart, all the other big retailers who are doing self-checkouts. Those self-checkouts are being trained in Kenya. Do we have Kenyan companies that employ this technology?
So then essentially what we have is a capacity in everything else except for the will to then now just turn that screw and say, not only do we have that capacity, not only do we have the resource, but we have the experience and the knowledge to become equal competitors in this.
Not even just the knowledge, because sometimes I think blindness can be by choice. Like you see the point, but you miss the point because your target is elsewhere. I always like to say, a study is done, and this is where economists come into the conversation. Can you give us the costing of what is happening? How much is, when we say, let's contribute to this economy by pumping 1 million jobs into this dynamic, can we really examine what those 1 million jobs are doing? And this is why tech training or tech cleaning up jobs come with a huge mental health risk. Just that's the nature of the job. If we want AI to emulate humans, we need to teach it the worst of humans. And that's essentially what the job is. For the clean stuff, nobody cares. We report the things, the very people being murdered, people being brutalized, children being abused. That is what we report. That is what we want people to train the models based on, right? Okay, who is doing this work in the Kenyan environment? It's very young people in high school, just after high school, in university, a very young population, right? Remember the thing about when does your mind fully form? Okay, so inject severe mental health to that person. And my personal prediction, I'm not an economist, I am not a mental health expert, I have to give that disclaimer, but I do worry that there will be a gap where people who took up employment really, really young on have gaps, huge gaps where they cannot work. And I've seen it with the clients I represent. Everybody has reported mental health illness, and then there's a huge gap where they just cannot work. Either it's severe insomnia, PTSD, so that take that out of the economy and see what it's doing to you as a country as well. So when I think about what could be happening from a policy level, number one, this whole lucky us, thanks for choosing us, woye, woye, we have to stop that with immediacy. Number two, we need to educate ourselves. Whose algorithms are we building? And how do we leverage on the work that is being done in Kenya to build our own capacity? Yes, now we have an AI policy for every job, because the other thing about AI training work, it's gamified. I'm sure we all play video games. Can you imagine, like, if you're supposed to catch these 3 targets and then you go to the next level, but you never really get to the next level? It's been gamified like that. So you say, for every 10 jobs that you break down because you're protecting your IP, give us 1 full job so that an engineer can also learn how to train these models. Like, leverage on what we have to achieve sustainability. There are routes out of this hell.
Can I just add to like your point? One of the things that I realized that a lot
as you're adding, we're doing our final thoughts.
Oh my God!
So let that be your final thoughts.
Okay, so
carry on.
One of the things that I realized that's not happening outside of just like training people to become experts and like equal foot players in the game. the thing that kind of is missed
Yes.
continually is like we are beholden to this governments because of debt. Like there's so much debt here that we are supposed to pay back. I think the first step that a lot of African governments should take is weaponize the debt that they're holding over us to be like, we're not going to pay this.
Yeah.
We're not doing it. What are you going to do, Lucas?
It's very Viet Cong, eh?
Yeah,
Like, I
yes,
like it.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm just like, because like if everyone gets to do what they want,
Yeah.
we can do what we
Exactly.
want. And I think taking debt out of the question frees up a lot of how Africa works.
Yes.
Because we're kind of just like, you say jump, okay, how high? And then like we keep doing that dance again and again and again. So
Yeah.
if we get rid of debt, I feel like a lot of the money that is generated in our economies is going to find a way to flow into the different spaces in which it's needed.
Yeah.
And then secondly, there's just to turn back to the freedom of expression
yeah.
thing, we have an issue where it's compounding to, it's something that I saw, I think Nanjala Nyabola shared. It's called collective helplessness. We're all survivors, you guys. We wore shorts with textbooks in the butt when we were being beaten. We can figure out that same mentality
Yeah.
to
love
fight
that.
back against people who are infringing on our freedom of expression. If
Yeah.
we can survive that, if we were communicating with friends, like writing messages, but we are writing it as a list of noisemakers, we can figure which our
Pain.
list.
It comes from pain, yeah.
And so that, I feel like this knowledge base in tech, in the models that people are training for AI, if we leverage all these innovative techniques,
Yeah.
we can figure out a way not to pay back that debt,
Yeah.
because I think we've paid enough. People have paid with their lives. They are already building a third generation slave ship. Like, we can literally get out of this. And lastly,
Yes.
just like for the Butere Girls kids, the president said that when it comes to minors, we are supposed to instill good values in them. Bro, I don't think you even have like a good value platform to stand on. Like, everything around the presidency is just like a tinier explosion compounding into an even bigger explosion. There's a story today that was shared by The Nation that there's a hospital that's organ trafficking. The Shakahola massacre was not even resolved. We don't know what happened there. And there's so many other atrocities that have followed. So if you're really, really about good values,
Then
tear
stand
gassing,
up- yeah.
yes, tear
Stand up
gassing.
for the values that you claim to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, Justine, you chef's kiss.
Asante.
Right, like that was really well put. Tom, I'm going to kata your freedom of expression kidogo. Kidogo,
Very on
kidogo,
brand, very on
kidogo.
brand. What
tu-
shirt are you wearing?
Kidogo, ati very on brand. Very on brand. What shirt are you wearing?
African censored, imagine.
Who unani gaslight sasa? Because
No,
gaslight.
they're
is
censoring.
All right.
You're censoring me.
But we really are out of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Tom, I'd like to make your final point kind of succinct and
Very
in only the way that you can, Tom. So it's an encouragement.
What's the opposite of gaslighting?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't know what.
Yes, yes.
Tom,
So
please.
this is going to take a minute.
Uh-huh.
We've seen a
One.
lot of, yes,
Okay.
1 minute. You've actually taken 10 seconds. But we've seen a lot of, I know on TikTok, I've seen, and on Instagram, a lot of claims to do with the finance bill 2025.
Yep.
It's not out yet. It's not even out yet. It's still wrapped in some papers in Parliament, but we'll find out about it by April 30th.
Yeah.
That's when the finance bill and I think the appropriations bill are tabled in Parliament. I could be wrong in one of those, especially the appropriations bill. But the finance bill is usually tabled in Parliament by April 30th. Now it's April 14th, so 2 weeks.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of comments. Those are not factual. The bill isn't out yet, but that isn't to mean that new taxes aren't incoming, because the Kuria Kimani MP for Molo who's also part of the the appropriations committee, right?
Yeah.
He did say that no, it's actually
The budget.
finance planning.
Okay.
It's the National Finance Planning Committee of the Assembly. I could have gotten those words wrong, but
Yeah.
he said that for expenditure which is something that I completely disagree, for expenditure to keep rising like Kenyans are demanding, somewhere the money has to be found, which is usually in taxes. So that's incoming. But the claims that we are seeing online about a finance bill 2025 being out yet and claims about additional taxes on new bonds, well, that's something we could expect to come in because we also saw the locally manufactured, was it sanitary towels last year? There's a tax that was incoming. So some protectionism is expected to some degree in the next few weeks, but it's not out yet.
So your call essentially is, guys, hold your horses.
Yes.
Let's discuss this on the basis of fact, right? And not on assumption. Although, like I said, there's a bit of reading of the tea leaves from some of the things that have already come out in terms of some, the budgetary proposals. Mercy, look, you've made so many great points here today. I'd like for you to end with perhaps one, again, succinct point that kind of wraps this up and brings this home for us.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll end it on this note. Africa, we are not on the table. And we are not on the table for two very different reasons. We've failed to recognize our power and what we bring to the table. So we've opted to serve the people at the table. I hope you get that example.
Incredibly visceral example, but yes, I get it. Yes.
But secondly, it's because we lost our passion for the fight for universal access to the internet. And in 30 seconds, I'll tell you why that's important. Data sets come from existing material out in the internet. If you think about it, is your grandmother on the internet, not just on WhatsApp, but is her life on the internet? Is her experience on the internet? She is not, and maybe a lot of parents are not. There's a whole generation that is not because of affordability issues. And that what means from an AI perspective is that while we're talking about being left behind, we have been left behind part 2, where now data sets will be trained without our models and they will be fixed post-training to teach this is what a black person looks like, an African looks like, this is what an African show looks like without the original voice. So Africa, we are not on the table. Let's go back. Let's make sure everybody is on the internet and everybody has the ability to participate in the current digital era so that we can be represented in the next era. And number 2, let us understand our power in this new field. Let's take the example of China. They understood their power. They are using their power well. Let us use our power well.
Let us use our power well. I mean, this show has been part dystopian, but also in large part hopeful, right? And I love that we're ending on that hopeful note. And I am going to reserve my comments completely because there's just no time for them. But to say that I was really interested. It was really interesting for me just observing all of you have this discussion today and to listen to all of your thoughts. Guys, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. It's been a fire episode, as I'm seeing in some of the comments, at least even in our WhatsApp group. Yeah, it's all good. Mercy, thank you so much for joining us this week on The Big Picture. We shall invite you back, definitely. Yeah, indubitably. All of the Liz, you shall be back in that seat to help us now, again, just pass through some of what's going on across the world. Tom, Justina, Santeni Sana, this has been great. John Alan Namu, thank you very much for joining us on The Big Picture. As always, the links will be up tomorrow for this version of The Big Picture on our Spotify. Why am I losing this? I'm just I don't know why I'm having a bit of brain fog here. But it'll be up on Spotify. It'll be up on Apple Podcasts as well as your various other podcasting platforms. Follow us on YouTube. Also, look out for Title Deals that's coming out at the end of this week and lots of the interesting work that we're producing here at Africa Uncensored. And keep watching for what's going on and come back here so that we can tell you what the big picture is. All right? Have a great day, have a great afternoon, have a great evening wherever you are. We'll catch you next week. See you guys.
If you put a thief in charge of a country, thievery becomes everybody's favorite pastime.
You know, it is like a movie.
I'm talking about very senior security officers, but they are the perpetrators.
The cartels are more powerful than the justice system.
Title Deals is back. And the deals just got darker.